You are live.
Hey,
Yeah, so we're
everybody.
streaming from our 5 accounts.
Yes.
Yeah, you can take your pick. I mean, we like school choice. We like choice in all things in life as well. So we're streaming from 5 different accounts right now. The Choice Media YouTube account, my personal YouTube account, my personal Twitter and Facebook accounts, and then also the Twitter account of the Choice Media TV Twitter account. So yeah, take your pick, and I want to remind
I think if they're
everyone.
hearing your words, they've already picked.
Yeah, but hey, maybe they're on my Facebook and they really like
Okay.
following the Twitter stuff, or maybe
Okay. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
maybe they want to jump onto the Choice Media YouTube or something, since you guys have a lot of subscribers as well. But look, I mean, the main point is you guys can share your comments with us on any of those 5 platforms, and we'll be able to bring them up at the bottom down here, and we'll be able to respond to any of your comments or questions. So make sure you're engaged in the conversation. We have a lot of things to talk about today. Yeah, I
I would
mean,
also
Bob
say, by
Dowdy,
the way, one good thing about the Choice Media YouTube page of those options is that it's more of a permanent thing. It's kind of hard to find in a regular social media platform. If you're sending this to someone, if a week from now or 2 days from now you want to send, this show to someone else, it's probably easier to find it on YouTube than it is to find it, in Facebook or Twitter. Anyway, whatever. All right, can I do my clean in now?
Are you trying to steal my?
I am. Yeah, I'm trying to promote. Please, you're a juggernaut, Corey. Please, we all know that.
All right, let's do a clean in.
Here's my clean in, everybody. It's Seis de Mayo. Welcome to the Random Assignment podcast and video show. My name is Bob Bowden. I'm with Choice Media, joined as always by the great Corey DeAngelis, whose name is inverted on Twitter, by the way. It's at DeAngelis Corey, if you're watching this, you see on your screen there. And so, Corey, so this, did you celebrate Cinco de Mayo yesterday?
Not really. I did. I mean, look, we're all closed down. We can't really do a lot, during the closures. When I was growing up in Texas, though, in San Antonio, Cinco de Mayo was a big celebration, and we called it Cinco de Drinko. Go and get margaritas at the Riverwalk in San Antonio. So that used to be a lot of fun, but now it's pretty uneventful. Yesterday. What about you?
I have to confess my ignorance. I didn't really know the history. Apparently, the Mexicans kicked out the French on Cinco de Mayo. That was the origin of that day, which I guess I'd either never learned or forgotten or something. But and I also heard an interesting tidbit that actually in Mexico, it's not that big of a deal that day. It's more celebrated by, gringos in the U.S. than it is by Mexicans. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, we should get to the Choice Media story of the day from Cinco de Mayo. But before that, I want to give a little bit of an update on what's going on with the whole Harvard situation. And I feel like we've been talking about the Harvard's attack on homeschooling for the past 3 weeks now. But
there was news. There was news development. Newswire, breaking news. Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, I mean, so hopefully this is the last development. But I mean, look, this is an ongoing battle. The fight for freedom and defending home education liberties is not going to end anytime soon. I mean, this battle is happening in the United States and elsewhere. So it's not like this is going anywhere anytime soon, but we have a little bit of closure in a recent discovery that I had from the Center for Responsible Home Education. From my take on it, I don't think they want to actually ban homeschooling, but they were supposed to talk. A couple of their members were supposed to talk at the closed explicitly anti-homeschooling conference at Harvard Law School. And I think they want to have like very stringent regulations on homeschooling. It's in their name, like responsible home education, right? And so they posted on their Facebook on May 1st, just a few days ago, that the anti-homeschooling summit was actually canceled and that they're not going to be going anymore because, they said it was because of COVID-19. And this is the first time any public information has come out about a cancellation of this conference. And it just so happened that public information came out the same exact day that the Harvard Kennedy School was hosting the pro homeschooling event, where myself and Carrie McDonald and Peter Gray and others were giving pro homeschooling discussions. So it was pretty interesting that the cancellation information came out the same day as the pro homeschooling event, but then also it came out not just the same day, but the same exact time as we were giving our remarks. that that information came out. And I'll go to some of the proof here. But I tweeted about it. It blew up on Twitter. Look, they canceled their anti-homeschooling conference. But here's the big information here from the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. Say it's no longer happening this summer. They say it was because of COVID-19. As you can see, this was on May 1st, about the same time we gave our talk. And they also, here's the same post, said that it's no longer happening. And then I also talked to their director of outreach at that organization. So it wasn't just their Twitter or their Facebook account, but I also talked to an individual who works there. And they said, the Harvard information didn't come out publicly, but they shared the information privately with the participants saying, it's not happening anymore. And so, look, this is the information we have. But I do want to say that the Harvard website, it still looks like it's still happening June 18th and 19th, 2020. But all other information that we have on this topic, more recent information, more updated information suggests that conference was actually canceled according to people who were actually presenting at the conference.
I mean, I would say on the one hand, you could say that the pro homeschooling conference was an online event versus this, which was an in-person event. So arguably, if you were going to use COVID-19 as a reason for the cancellation, it does make some sense that what we're calling the anti-homeschooling event at Harvard in June.
It was the anti-homeschooling.
I was about to say, they don't call it that. I'm just trying to say they don't. But nevertheless, so yes, while, a lot of events around the country have been canceled because of coronavirus that were in-person conferences, et cetera. On the other hand, the timing, as you point out, is kind of so suspect. And I kind of think you personally, Corey, brought a sledgehammer to that plan.
Well,
I don't know. We can all just, unless they admit it, we can all just speculate. But I happen to.
Of course, they're always going to say it's COVID-19, to which I would respond, we did ours, virtually. And,
they
made it open
moved it to a virtual.
Yeah, a lot of other conferences have moved virtually too. I even an academic conference where, you present your research and stuff that I did in March, they really quickly transitioned it to a virtual setting. And, Harvard had all this time to transition to a virtual conference. And
it's still a month away. It's still a month away.
Yeah,
and furthermore, it's my brother, for example, runs a program for gifted high school students. It's a summer program each year for gifted high school students. What do they do? For something like this thing's been running 40, 50 years, this program, that he was in it when he was a kid. And what do they do? This summer, for the first time, it's an online program. It's lots of groups have done that, as to which you refer. So, yeah.
Okay. So, hopefully, after this is all done, after the coronavirus lockdown, maybe we can get a debate with Elizabeth Bartholet and the anti-homeschooling crowd to debate some of the speakers who did the pro-homeschooling conference. Hopefully Bartholet would be okay with doing that. They closed off all their other ideas, so I don't think they would be open to a debate. But who knows?
Exactly. Maybe. I don't think generally there's an exception once in a while, and you and I were in an exception once regarding a debate. But normally the establishmentarians run from our side. That's usually the case. All right, well, let's move on. So in the world of school choice, moving from homeschooling to education savings accounts, in this case in Tennessee, there was a judge who ruled, now this is a county judge in Davidson County, Tennessee, but ruled that the education savings account program in Tennessee was unconstitutional. And the logic for that is because they said it violated the state constitution's home rule. Why? Because it said it only applied to two counties, Davidson and Shelby counties, essentially where Nashville and Memphis are in Tennessee. This is an education savings account the bill was targeted geographically to two places in the state, and students were not eligible elsewhere in the state. And so this judge said, because it targets only certain geographies, it's unconstitutional because it's improperly imposing the program on two counties without their consent.
What a bunch of baloney.
Go ahead, Corey. I know you're wound up on this.
Jason Bedrick has the best response to this, and we'll get to that in a second. But look, this isn't being imposed on anybody. You know, every individual family gets the choice of whether to use the education savings account. I mean, they would have a good argument if, you know, this somehow abolished all government schools in these 2 counties or whatever, for whatever reason. But that's not the case. Nothing's being imposed on these families. Each individual family gets to pick. And what's also interesting here is that I don't know if you remember, Bob, but the two people who brought this, you know, idea up to the courts was, I think, the Nashville mayor, John Cooper, and his legal director, which I think is related to him because they have the same last name, Bob Cooper. They both went to private schools themselves in Tennessee, and now they're turning around and fighting really hard to prevent low-income families and other families from having similar educational options in Tennessee. But I mean, like you said, it's really interesting that Governor Bill Lee, and, you know, and I'm happy about it, that Governor Bill Lee put his foot down and said, look, you know, this is going to be challenged and appealed at the state level. Right. And the Attorney General also, you know, backed him up on this as well.
Well, yeah. In fact, there's a second story. If you could pull up the second link, Tennessee is going to continue to accept applications for this education savings account, despite this. And this is, again, just one county judge. So I don't think the school choice advocates in Tennessee are going to go running for the hills just because one county judge doesn't like the plan. There's an irony here, too, which is a lot of times when you have programs that are universal, what happens is that's criticized for not directing funds toward the low-income students who need it the most. So it's almost like you can't win either way. They will be attacked if it's universal for not, you know, for not advantaging rich kids, you know, instead of just targeting the low-income kids. In fact, we'll see later in a story today, the COVID-19 education funds are criticized because a change was made to give it to some private school kids who may not be poor. So in other words, if you target just the poor, then in Tennessee, that's a reason to strike it down because, it should have been everybody. And in a case like in the federal COVID relief, you target more like everybody, and then they say, oh, that's wrong because you should be targeting the poor.
Whatever argument you make, Bob, or whatever proposal is put forth, they're going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. I mean, that's what we're seeing in Tennessee, right? I mean, the reason they limited it to a pilot program in 2 counties was, you know, so that it wouldn't be universal, and so that it wouldn't be a huge program that everybody could access. I would have liked a universal program from the get-go to be, you know, in all geographic areas. But now you have these people, you know, trying to use the Tennessee Constitution as some kind of argument about, you know, what you brought up earlier to try to nix a program because it's targeted to a particular geographic area. Then, you know, people should respond to the Nashville mayor and say, oh, well, then are you saying that you agree with the universal school choice program? Do you want the whole state to have access to this program? I mean, we should ask the Nashville mayor that.
Yeah, this is actually a pet point of mine that I like to make. So I have friends of mine, by the way, who are legislators who have said to me, oh, we like the idea of school choice and all that, but we're worried we'll be attacked by people saying, well, this will be an instant revolution. It'll be chaos in our state if we suddenly let people just march out of the public schools. The budgets will just go haywire all at once. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they target some of these little geographies. And what I answer that with is what I learned from my experiences when I was visiting Wisconsin, and I talked with Scott Walker, former governor there, about it. You know, they started with a Milwaukee voucher program, then they expanded it to Racine, Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. But then eventually what they did was they were going to add Green Bay. But what Scott Walker did is he just made a statewide voucher program, but said on the year one, only 1% can exit from each district for everywhere in the state. That's the cap for everywhere in the state. And if it's too many people, you have a lottery to find out which get to be in the 1%. If 3% want to leave, you find out you have a lottery. But then what they did is they could then next year in the legislature make it 2%. Yeah. And then in a subsequent year, 3%. And that's how you grow it without this chaos argument, which often does. Ordinary people think, oh, well, that's not good. I don't want just like sudden budgets going haywire and all kinds of teachers not knowing if they have jobs. And so anyway.
Well, you know what? If there is a mass exodus from government schools when people get their choice, I mean, that should just make you question the quality of the government-run schools, right? That,
Well,
I know the political argument that, oh, we don't want our schools to close down, we don't want to lose our jobs, but I mean, the education system should be about the kids, right? I mean, this is like saying that, well, I mean, it's kind of like saying that
it's just a transition argument, Corey. It's just about transitioning smoothly instead of transitioning in a hectic revolutionary chaos. That's all. I can understand that. I bet you can too. If you were actually in charge of running these schools, you would want some predictability, some degree of predictability. And it's hard to argue that a 1% enrollment drop is some sort of, or even 2% or whatever. But the point is that's the way. The way to answer that is to cap the percent that leave, but have it everywhere. Not answer that by limiting geographies.
Yeah, I mean, that's the better approach, right? To take an incremental approach than getting nothing at all. But look, they don't want even 1% of families to be able to have the choice to use educational choice. But I mean, my larger point is it shouldn't matter how many people are going to leave. It shouldn't matter if the status quo is losing, a ton of jobs. What should matter is whether the families are getting the choice that they want. And protecting jobs is not a legitimate argument to keep people from switching to good schools. I mean, imagine if, again, I like to use the Walmart example, not that I don't like Walmart, but if you could only use food stamps at Walmart, and all of a sudden, you said, oh, you can use your food stamps at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. And if, Walmart said, oh, well, we don't want to lose our jobs, so we got to do like a 1% thing each year, I would think that would be ridiculous. I know, Bobby, I'm not arguing with you. You would think that would be a ridiculous argument to make as well. And similarly, it's a ridiculous plan that the other side.
You have to make political arguments in the real world we live in, so you don't scare people and you can move the ball down the field. That's all I'm trying to say. What I also wanted to say about this Tennessee thing, we had a commentator, a co-host on this Tennessee story who was quite young. In fact, the youngest co-host we've ever had on a Choice Media Story of the Day. And so, Corey, I was wondering if you could show our viewers our youngest co-host. Pardon?
Yeah, let's check it out. I'm pulling it up. Youngest co-host of the Choice Media Story of the Day ever.
Yes. Yeah.
Hello, it's Cinco de Mayo. I'm Jason Bedrick, Director of Policy at EdChoice, and I'm joined today by the youngest ever co-host of the Choice Media Story of the Day. Today's story is Judge rules Governor Bill Lee's Education Savings Account program unconstitutional. The judge said that the pilot program violated a section of the state constitution known as Home Rule because the law only applied to Davidson and Shelby counties. As a result, the judge said the state improperly imposed the program on the two counties without their consent. Now, frankly, this is absurd because the program isn't imposed on anybody. These scholarships are made available to families who affirmatively opt in. You can find more stories like this at choicemedia.tv and especially at the Choice Media app. Hello, it's Cinco de Mayo. I'm Jason Bedrick.
So do you know, Corey, the age? There were two Messieurs Bedrick in that clip there. Do you know the age of the younger Mr. Bedrick in that clip?
No, I don't. How about you?
Okay, I do know. At the time, no, at the part, what?
Like a month or something? I don't know.
No, see, I'm glad I brought it up. This is key information. The age of the younger Mr. Bedrick was 3.5 hours.
Oh, shite.
3.5, the age of 3.5 hours in that video.
What was the second youngest Choice Media Story of the Day? Did he have a beat by a long shot?
Probably you.
Yeah.
Probably you.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. But I mean, moving along. All right. Let's see. You got something in I mentioned Milwaukee a second ago. But go ahead there, Corey.
Well, yeah, I just want to say Jason hit the nail on the head that the program isn't being imposed on anybody, that everybody voluntarily opts in to use an education savings account. So yeah, this whole argument about it being imposed on certain geographies is totally absurd. And I like how, you guys featured the youngest Bedrick ever, the youngest co-host ever, on the Choice Media Story of the Day. But yeah, we have some other things going on with, of course, during the coronavirus, we still have people having trouble adjusting to new virtual education. And in particular, we have, the traditional public school system seems to be having a lot of trouble, adjusting for whatever reason. Betsy DeVos has called out, some instances of of people using, federal guidance and federal law as an excuse to not transition to virtual education. But now we just have, some examples in Milwaukee of parents, saying that there's been a lot of wasted time, and parents and advocates have been saying that the Milwaukee government or public school system has been really slow to start virtual learning.
Mm-hmm.
Bob, do you have any other?
Yeah, no. It says
it
gives this anecdote of a parent in Milwaukee. It said until Friday, she has yet to hear from any of her son's teachers. And the son, I guess, shares a family laptop with an older brother because he hasn't received the Chromebook from his school. And while he could see Milwaukee Public Schools educational games, etc., there were no actual assignments, no interactions with teachers, no clear explanation of expectations. I mean, these are many, many thousands of kids. Sometimes we talk a lot about anecdotes that are interesting policy-wise, but right now, with thousands of schools shut down, we have these big districts like Milwaukee, and there's also a story about Philadelphia. It says nearly 2 months after school buildings closed, Philadelphia districts has just now beginning their kind of online learning, official online learning. There's that story in the Notebook, which is part of the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's kind of their education section. It's kind of, it's been part sponsored by the union is my understanding in the past, this Notebook part of the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper. Anyway,
so they're just now starting. In
other words, it presents this massive contrast where we have these big top-down systems like Milwaukee, like Philadelphia, but like countless other places, which show this gaping disconnect between these if you look at little schools, individual schools, that are doing things quickly in a nimble way, and these big districts that just can't figure it out. It reminds me of my friends who advocate for the abolition of school districts. In fact, if I were a superintendent or a school board of one of these big school districts, I think I would just let the principals just pretend that they're just not in a district and they're running their own school. It seems to me this distribution of this kind of responsibility works immensely better. And whereas these big bloated top-down things, they're like, 5-year agriculture ministry plans by the Soviet Union, where the Soviets are planning how many tractors you need and how much fertilizer I need. Meanwhile, like all the irrigation equipment breaks. And it's like this top-down stuff is terribly managed. And you look at these little nimble private schools, and they're like jumping on it, Not that it's perfect anywhere, but that was my take when I saw this.
Yeah, I mean, part of it can be the size, right? The size of the district versus the size of the private schools. And that's, can account for some of the difference and nimbleness of the private schools to be able to adjust. But I think it has a lot to do with its incentives too, right? I mean, if you are a, government-run school district and you know that you're going to get a lot of money whether the kids attend your schools or not, then you don't have a really strong incentive. Now, granted, in Milwaukee, they do have private school choice, but in Philadelphia, they don't have private school choice. They have some charters. Well,
there are tax credit scholarships in Pennsylvania, but I think they're oversubscribed. I think they're over.
Yeah, I think twice as many people want the private tax credit scholarships in Philadelphia than they have available. So, I mean, there's not a lot of competition, and especially for the kids who are trying to get into a charter school, but they're stuck on a wait list, or you have people trying to get the tax credit scholarship program, but again, they're on another wait list. I mean, so the traditional public schools in both these locations are shielded largely from competition. And so, I mean, their main incentive is not to change really quickly and to adapt to the coronavirus and to, and also could just be regulatory reasoning here. It could be just that the red tape in the government school system, has the hands tied. And, even if it doesn't actually have the hands tied, it could be a mental thing. Like I was saying earlier with, a lot of school districts throughout the United States were saying, well, there's this IDEA restriction, a federal law about special needs students, and I'm just afraid that I'm going to get in trouble for that. Yeah, so it might not even be that there's an explicit rule saying that they cannot adjust to virtual education, but they may have some things, they might just think that they can't take action, or they may just be used to not, having to adjust on the fly. And then again, it could be the size thing as well that you're referring to. But this reminds me of a survey that came out a couple of weeks ago where they asked students who are in public schools and private schools and just asked them, has your school continued to do virtual education since the shutdown? And the private school students were over twice as likely as the public school students to say that their schools were actually meeting virtually and that they were adapting to the brick and mortar school closures. And again, it can be a size thing, it can be an incentives thing, a competitive pressures thing, and it could just be a regulatory red tape burden.
I think you make a really good point with that. And sometimes people like hear us say, traditional government schools, teacher tenure, they can't get rid of the bad teachers. You've got all these bad teachers. They think that we're like, while that's true, it can also be true that even some of the best teachers, dare I say, even you and me, Corey, if we were in some of these big bloated government institutions, it might be very hard to operate efficiently, to create innovative curriculum, to do new innovative things that we think up. We might be so burdened by any kind of paperwork and crazy controls that it would stifle almost anybody, so it's not just, so I really do believe, I've seen it actually with my own eyes, where it's not, yes, there are some bad teachers in the government schools that can't be gotten rid of, but a lot of times they're great teachers for whom that environment it sort of steals their soul in a way. It can just drag them down, into the mire or something like that. So I'm just echoing your point with more words,
Yeah, I mean, Tilly. It's interesting that Tilly is chiming in about Pennsylvania charter, the cyber charter schools, virtual charter schools in Pennsylvania. We're offering their expertise to the traditional districts or the government school districts to help them get online, and they actually refuse. I haven't seen an article on this, but I trust Tilly's word on this. And it also reminds me of how the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators and their president, Mark DeRucco, actually lobbied to make it illegal to switch to virtual charter schools during the pandemic because
it's crazy. Yeah.
Go
justify that.
He even admitted that it was because they were afraid of losing resources. And, just paraphrasing his words, that he said something along the lines of, parents might figure out that virtual schools are a good option right now. We might lose, resources. And, he didn't get everything he wanted, but the state legislature passed a bill that allows virtual schools to take new students during the crisis, but doesn't compensate them financially for doing so, which is absolutely ridiculous. And, it's just, the opposite of what you want to do in this time of crisis. You want to incentivize people to help. You don't want to not incentivize schools to help people in need. Right. That's just completely backwards. And, hopefully Pennsylvania changes that going forward.
And for all the states that have no statewide online education option at all, no online charter schools, no online state, even like a Florida virtual, like a state-run online alternative school, anything like that. There are about half of them. I think actually there are about 22 states that do offer statewide online learning. Tilly probably knows the exact number, but there was a report I was looking at from 2019. And I was wondering, actually, this is kind of a failed idea I had. I was wondering if there was a direct correlation between states being kind of Janus states, meaning the agency fee states, as a metric for teacher union power, states where even teachers who hated the union would still have to pay agency fees. So that was about half of the country. If there was a correlation between that map of states and the map of states that had no, Tilly says around 30, and that map of states that have, no online school. And while it's not complete, for example, California is a big teacher union state. California does have online education programs. Nevertheless, I did notice a very clear Eastern Seaboard wraparound. You can go from Connecticut to New York to New Jersey to Delaware to Maryland, all states that were agency fee states where the unions have that kind of power. All states I just mentioned have no statewide online learning. Anyway, let me move on. I want to talk about the California Supreme Court, and hearing this big case about whether local governments can reduce worker pension benefits. Okay, this is a thing, as states are spiraling from the lack of revenue due to the coronavirus. The sudden drop, basically kind of a sudden instant recession, so to speak, for so many state budgets. They're cutting all kinds of places, cutting here, cutting there, and so this has come up to say, well, maybe we can also cut the amount that we pay teachers in pensions, and this has now gone to the California Supreme Court. We don't have a ruling yet, but it's now being heard there. And it got me thinking about this, Corey. I'd be interested in your thought on it, which is that, in terms of governments being able to change their promises, so to speak, or just their financial realities being reflected in the part of people. Like in other words, governments can increase my taxes whenever they want. Like out of the blue, I can have to pay them more and I have less. So how is a pension exactly different than that? I kind of thought to myself, well, what if they just tell teachers unions, we're not going to change your pension level. We're just going to create what's called a pension tax. Okay, it's almost like then they have to be like, oh, it's called a tax? All right, well, you're allowed to raise those whenever you want, as long as you don't officially lower my pension payment. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this. It's a certain states in particular, like Illinois, like New Jersey, like California, where these teacher pensions are. Chad Alderman
I think at first, I think first of all that they shouldn't make these promises and defined benefit pension plans with extremely ridiculous rates of returns. I mean, you look at the market rate of return on investments. And, the long-term trend, I want to say, at least when I was taking economics, it was, 3% or below or lower than that, depending on risk level for the long-term trend return on investments. And I think pensions, when they build into their, benefits that they define, I think they have much higher rates of return. And they just say, oh, well, this time it's going to be different. Maybe it's 7% or 8%. And so, we have all these underfunded pensions in the long run. And I mean, this just highlights that issue, right? I mean, when you have a recession, what's the biggest, form of stuff that we're spending money on? I mean, a lot of times it's pensions. And I'll bring up a tweet that I shared, I think from Chad Alderman a couple of weeks ago. Illinois just became the first state, I believe, that now spends more on pension liabilities than everything else combined in their K-12 education budget. So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that stuff like this is coming up in California. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think one of the answers is stop making these promises based on defined benefits.
And yet, when I've said this to legislators,
stop building in these ridiculous returns.
And yet, when I've said this to legislators, they say, hey, how about just we grandfather everybody else, but the new people get 401k type plans. And what they say is, well, we'd love to do that, but we need the contributions from the new employees. Otherwise, it'll explode even worse. In other words, the pension plan is so screwed up that we have to keep, it's like a heroin addiction. We need the new people to be part of this horrible, bloated, bankrupt plan because it'll be even more bankrupt if we don't enroll the new people. And so...
Well, I mean, they could do some type of phase out thing. And look, I mean, for listeners, if you want to know, the geniuses behind pensions, go to the Reason Foundation Pension Integrity Project. They actually do really good work on pensions. And so they touch all that stuff. And so I outsource all the pension work to them, but they have really good ideas for reform. And I don't know exactly what the proposals are, but I would think some type of proposal to phase out the current system we have instead of trying to get rid of it overnight because of those problems that you highlighted.
And also Chad Alderman of Bellwether did a video for Choice Media that was just released a few months ago that's on the Choice Media YouTube page. You can pull up his talk, and he explains how pensions are really set up to benefit the older teachers, a lot of the young teachers that leave their jobs before they vest. They get really screwed over by the existing pension plan. It's kind of almost designed to do that. That only gives the pension plan more money because they don't have to pay out when people leave before vesting, and they like it that way. It's kind of a scheme in a bit to benefit older, experienced, long-term teachers at the expense of the young teachers who have no power in the union to change it. So it's kind of a scheme in that way.
I'm sure you've seen some of these graphs too. I mean, here's just something from Chad Alderman. I don't think it's the Choice Media thing you were talking about, but haven't you seen those graphs where essentially like you get to a certain point, and then the pension benefits just like spike really quickly if you get to this year in your career, but it's not really smooth. It's like you don't get really much of anything as in the form of a benefit. But if you've been there like 30 years or something, it spikes really quickly.
And they
so
also
it really screws over people who, just want to teach for 3 years or 4 years, or people who, for whatever reason need to retire 15 years into teaching and not
or
30.
move to another state because the spouse has a new job or something. Yes, all kinds of things like that. There's what's called pension spiking, where a lot of times pensions are based on the average of the last 3 years that you worked or something like that. So they will get, little districts will give these raises right at the end of someone's career, just so their pension will be based on a higher number, because those districts don't care. It's the state often that has to just deal with that higher pension obligation. It's like a way to, let's give some, like a candy, give a free giveaway to our favorite person, so-and-so, or actually sometimes everybody or lots of people. But it's a way to kind of, so the district doesn't have to really shoulder the cost. It becomes this enormous extra cost to the state because, these future pension payments for the rest of someone's life are just based on this little short amount of time at the end of their career.
Yeah. So what happens in the private market? If a private business goes out of business and they have a certain 401k plan or pension plan, and they promise their employees something, are they still legally bound to provide that benefit to them? Do you have any information on that, Bob? I don't know much about the pension system or 401k system.
Oh, well, to the extent that private corporations still have pensions, we'd have to find out if there are any left at all. I'm not sure there are, but in the old days there were. Yeah, my father still has a pension, I think, from his employer. I'd have to ask him, but anyway, in the modern era of 401ks, it's doesn't even pertinent at all. So, yeah.
But yeah, it's confusing. You brought up a good point earlier with California, how the government, has a decision to make here, right? It's either they harm the taxpayer by raising taxes to cover these pensions and other educational expenditures, essentially involuntarily. Their side will argue, the pro-government establishment side will argue that, well, Bob Bowden, if you live in New Jersey, you implicitly consent to all the taxes that are raised in New Jersey, and which I think is all bogus. There's no such thing as complicit consent to me. If it's not explicit consent, you can take that logic into a lot of other realms of life where implicit consent doesn't really make a lot of sense. If I tell you I don't want to do, if I don't want something, and you're saying, well, unless you run away over to another state, then you consent to this transaction. Well, that doesn't make any sense.
But by the way, that's something that has to be named too, that in a whole bunch of these states, New Jersey is a good example, where people getting the pensions have often moved to Florida. Okay, so it's the taxpayers today paying teachers who are not spending that pension money in the state, including sales taxes and stuff, in the state where they were teachers, and in the state where the taxpayers are paying these pensions, it's there somewhere else. And so, it's go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, Bob, you're talking about stuff going on in New Jersey. I saw you tweeting about something. And
you were
trolling
we're talking about we're talking about the union. So I just did a little troll, I would say, of the NJEA, which is the largest teachers union in the state of New Jersey. They sent out this photo to their members, and this, it almost looks fake that it's, first of all, well, speaking of fake, so this is supposed to be like a Zoom meeting of teachers. And so this was just sent to me. Somebody I know saw this, and they're like, this is a fake Zoom meeting.
They put those together.
In other words, they have $131 million budget in this private organization called the NJEA, New Jersey Education Association Teachers Union. And they still are faking Zoom meetings to members to say, I guess, something like, look how hard we're working to plan our education, online education for your children or something. It's... And the 131 is really shocking. And of course, there's like dark money that went to the governor, the current governor, Phil Murphy, and there's stories on that. Anyway, so all right, so let's move on, Corey.
Yeah, it's amazing though. I mean, that I wonder if anyone else is talking about that, or how embarrassing it must be to pretend like you're working and then not. But I mean, talking, last week we talked a little bit about teachers gone wild, and we forgot to mention one that was highlighted by the Gateway pundit. A journalist named Cassandra Fairbanks actually exposed a teacher and linked a teacher on Twitter to a lot of things that she was saying, and explicitly admitting that she was teaching to her students. Here's the headline: California public school teacher admits to teaching her students that Trump is fascist, trashes Republican students on social media. So again, I mean, we talked a little bit last week about an account that was apparently an anonymous account, but it wasn't actually. And this is the same kind of case here, where the teacher thought they were anonymous, but there was so much evidence linking the teacher of this anonymous account to the actual person. But what's most shocking here is not just that she was, who cares if the teacher is trashing Trump on social media? I don't care about that. You have the First Amendment right to go trash Trump on social media, and I don't care about that whatsoever. But there are actual tweets of her saying that, I've ever taught my students about rule of law is a lie. The Trump administration is a fascist regime. I stopped circling that issues with my students. Call a spade a spade. So she's essentially admitting here that she's teaching her students that the Trump administration is a fascist regime. And here's another tweet. I committed to telling my students the truth instead of telling, quote unquote, both sides. On Friday, I told a Trump-supporting student that his facts are untrue. He corrects objective facts with propaganda, and I won't give that equal weight. This is a tough time to teach government. So she's essentially saying that she's not going to give both sides of the issue equal weight in regards to teaching about politics and government. But then this one's interesting as well. And I mean, there's an endless amount of these. I'll just go over these three. But look, in the tweet, she actually says, I just told my high school students that Trump is the, quote, 9/11 scandal that they'll tell their grandchildren about. Hashtag Trump Russia. So she went through all these things. She even goes on to say how.
Yeah, but actually, I suspect the Trump Russia thing was not that recent, right? That probably has to go back a few months. I think that's
right. It's a couple. It's a year. I mean, this is over years and years of her tweeting these things. Right. But yeah, I mean, she told her Hispanic students that, this is off the top of my head, but she told her Hispanic students that support Trump that, in her view, that, he's going to be hurting you more than anyone else, was what she directly said that she told to her students. And then she also,
not enough government. Go ahead.
But she also said that, when she goes over teaching about Trump, that she goes over the Jonestown cult, where they had a mass suicide, essentially comparing Trump to a cult member that gets people to undergo mass suicide. So there's just endless stuff and Cassandra Fairbanks really well documents all of these instances in her Gateway Pundit piece. And I recommend everyone go check that out if they want to check out some more of the information there. But look, I mean, again, the main point for me is that I don't care if you're a Trump supporter. I don't care if you support whatever type of politician, but you shouldn't be, telling your students one side of this story and essentially, engaging in political indoctrination. And again, because this is such a tough topic, and it might be true that it's a tough time to teach both sides of the issue in government right now. But that's again an argument for school choice that, if I feel my children are being indoctrinated by people who hate conservatives or who don't like, the president, I should be able to opt my student out of that school and vote with my feet to either another institution that's not as biased or maybe a little more biased in the direction that I want, so that you can avoid this indoctrination. And you shouldn't have to fund a type of worldview that you are inherently against. And you shouldn't have to, you shouldn't have to send your kids to a classroom where they're undergoing this type of
and I know you would say the same thing about a teacher who was saying Obama was exactly. The devil or Satan or something like that. So I mean, is there not enough government? Most of government that I learned in school was not about just current events. It was the U.S. Supreme Court and Marbury versus Madison, and it was FDR trying to increase the Supreme Court, I don't know, there's a million government stories in history that seem to me to be pertinent, and I don't know, just the branches of government and how they interact, and a lot of history, I think, was the focus anyway when I was at school.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess her take is that maybe it's more interesting to her students to talk about Trump and stuff. But I mean, if you're going to do that, you should be pretty careful about how you talk about it, especially if you have. Sides, yeah, and just do both sides, because I mean, I get it. If you're super anti-Trump, it's okay to have those views. If you're super anti-Obama, it would be okay to have those views as well, or anti-Joe Biden. It's okay to have those views as well, but as long as you're giving both sides of the story, and I understand that it's a hard thing to do if you have a very strong view one way or another. It's a very hard thing to do, but I mean, this teacher
then again, it's not that hard. Then again, it's not that hard to just be like, look, what my social studies teacher said when I was in 7th grade was, come to, be able to tell the class which presidential candidate you're for, and just have reasons, just have your own reasons, and be able to talk about them. And I thought that was great. So that, there are ways to do it. All right, so let me move on. So this is new guidance from Betsy DeVos means more coronavirus relief for private schools. Oh my goodness, for private schools, that's evil, isn't it?
Oh no.
All right, so every year districts that receive Title I money have to indirectly share it with local private schools that serve low-income students too. For those that don't know, Title I is federal money that goes to help low-income students. But as I just said, that when there are that these districts do have to share it with local private schools, this federal money. So the example they give in the piece, if 5% of low-income students who live within the boundaries of a certain district go to a private school, then 5% of that district's Title I dollars must be used for services for certain private school students, like after-school programs, tutoring, or counseling. The dollars can't go to private schools directly. So here's where this new guidance comes in that was just released last week. It says the Federal Education Department is going to set aside a portion of the relief money for private school students in a different way by calculating what share of all students in the area attend private school, not just what share of low-income students attend private school. So it might sound a bit technocratic or complicated, but this percentage that I just cited, like let's say 5% go to private school. Well, instead of being 5% of low-income kids, it's what percent of low-income kids go to private school. They're going to calculate it based on what percent of all kids go to private school. So this is what I was referring to before when I was like in the example in Tennessee. Oh, Tennessee gets struck down because because it's not benefiting everyone the same throughout the state. It picked geographies. Well, this is being criticized. This DeVos policy, this U.S. Department of Education policy, is being criticized because it is basically giving this COVID-19 education supplement grant money to private school kids across the land instead of in other words, it's as if and then I'll shut up. It's as if the establishment says that whatever percentage of money currently goes to low-income kids, that can only ever be increased in the next year and the next year and the next year. If there's ever any rebalancing, if it increases 10 years in a row and then 1 year it goes down, they will say, you're taking our money away. The low-income kids, you are hurting low-income kids. This one woman they quote, Noelle Ng, I think. It says, the guidance as released allows for wealthy children in a private school ineligible for Title I to receive this CARES funding that was allocated for district based on low-income students. She ends up saying, this is inequitable. Yeah, there you have it.
It's inequitable.
It's inequitable because it's supposed to always be like, if there's ever anything given to just all kids, she considers that inequitable. I mean, inequitable. Even new money, like this COVID relief is brand new money, but if it's given to all kids equally, that's inequitable. You have to always.
That doesn't make any sense.
It's actually equitable. The point is that it's she's saying equitable is inequitable, essentially.
Well, I mean, the problem is she wants all of that money to only go to government-run schools, right? I mean, a lot of people who are opposing this don't want money to go to private schools.
That's
and
true
I mean, if you want to if we can push back and say, well, you know what? Private schools should be getting money more than any other type of schools because look, they're having to compete with the free good. They'll probably, probably really worried about losing a lot of students right now because their students actually have to pay them out of pocket to attend private schools. And that's probably like why private schools are doing a really good job of switching to virtual really quickly, because they know if they don't, well, their customers are paying out of pocket. So they know that if they don't deliver, they're going to lose those customers.
And even in the coronavirus era, I've heard those schools say, look, we can't get 100% of kids laptops right now, but we can get 90% of kids internet connections and laptops. So we're just going to do it. And then we're going to work on the other 10% as fast as we can. Whereas I've seen big districts say until we can't start any classes, just like we saw with Philadelphia and Milwaukee. We can't start any classes till 100% have, well, that's
I mean,
that
Seattle
doesn't make any sense.
Seattle was doing that too, right? I mean, it's akin to saying that, if the Titanic's going down, if we have 100 people on board, but 99 lifeboats, we shouldn't be able to use any lifeboats. That doesn't make any sense. You should be able to.
It's inequitable. Yeah, it's inequitable to save. Yeah, right.
Kill everybody.
This is the theory that says,
have everybody sink to the bottom of the ocean, right? That's the argument. Right. Why not just catch up with that one, student? If there's 99 students that we can get an education right now, why not catch up with the one student and allocate additional resources to them once they have, the groundwork to be able to do that?
This is the theory that says if you're an upper middle income person and you read to your child, you're increasing inequity. You're helping that child be better, and that child already has advantage. You really should not read or say the alphabet to your child if you are even middle class, because that's increasing inequity, right? You should just actually try to reduce the education of that kid. This is kind of that theory.
Did you see the whole thing in the UK going on last year where they were trying to ban private schools? This is the same logic there as well. The UK Labour Party called in their official education platform to ban private schools in the name of equality.
Right.
I mean, that's essentially, let's in the name of equality, let's banish any form of opportunity. I mean, the better resolution, right, is to expand opportunity. You don't, prohibit anybody from having any type of better educational option. That's completely backwards, and that's the wrong way to go. And it's the same ideology here. Where some schools were saying they don't want to go virtual if they don't have if they only have 99% of kids transitioning over, not 100. But I mean, with this DeVos thing, I think it's good that, if there's going to be a relief package, and as you know, I'm against federal government intervention, but if there is going to be a relief package, it should go to, both sectors.
Follow equally, the child, right?
It should follow the child. And I think the best way to do it, even, in addition or instead of this, I think a better way to do it would have been to put that money in the pockets of families who have children in private schools. I understand they're trying to keep, private schools and allow, afloat and prevent them from shutting down with this relief package. But, maybe they could have split it up, 20% goes to families, 80% goes to the schools themselves. There
was a lot of talk, there was a lot of talk when the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, was being debated, that there was some sort of rumor, there was possibility of what so-called voucherizing Title I could happen, where you really did tie to the student. I mean, since they allocated based on the number of low-income kids in schools, also special needs kids, get federal money for that. Like, it's allocated by the kid, the number of students. Why not actually just give it to those students? Voucherizing Title I, it was called, and it eventually got kind of horse traded away, I think, in the congressional sausage making, as so anyway.
Yeah, so we have a couple more things to hit, and I think we should try to get to those, even though we're coming up to an hour. I mean, we talk too much, Bob, but
I know.
But let's see. I mean, Colorado's got some proposals to trim millions of dollars in education spending by shortening the school days in the school year. And I don't know if this is calling to shorten the school week. I know some Colorado districts, experimented before with shortening the school week to a 4-day school week, and I've seen some studies on those. But it looks like fewer schools and fewer school days overall instead.
I wanted to talk about these because it shows the financial contraction that a lot of these districts are facing. So just take Colorado as a test case. The Department of Education told a whole bunch of districts, 178 school districts, to plan for cuts between 1% and 10%. But apparently somebody else, Michael Griffith of the Learning Policy Institute, a school finance group, says he's hearing from districts that they're, preparing to cut budgets from 5 to 30%, with most of them in the 15 to 20% rate. 20% district cutting, their budgets, and these are enormous, cuts in some cases. And so I'm just kind of saying, on the one hand, like we have arguably, a case for more efficient education when you suddenly don't have money. That's how the original Milwaukee voucher plan happened, is because Milwaukee was just out of money. It's like, well, these private schools will do it for cheap. Let's just not go bankrupt. In other words, it was a financial, metaphysical, existential reality in Milwaukee that drove school choice. So arguably that could happen in districts across the country like these Colorado districts. But in other words, it does show you how, because coronavirus and everyone not working, actually does reduce taxes that go into paying for these schools. So the schools are, many of them, out of money. One approach is this Colorado approach, 15 to 20% cuts. But then another approach was reported in New Jersey, which I wanted to show, which is in Asbury Park, New Jersey, which is a very fun town when the bars are open. But the story in Asbury Park is they're taking a different approach. Instead of cutting 15 to 20%, what they thought they'd do is raise taxes, and a lot. Do you have the story? The Asbury Park?
Yeah, just found it. 22% tax hike. That's ridiculous.
This is their approach. Okay, you can actually, those can feel my blood boiling. This is their approach to the same problem Colorado just wrote about.
This is your taxes. This is your taxes, Bob. 22%.
Okay,
raise.
right, exactly.
Hey, if you don't like it, leave. Move to California. Oh, wait.
I know. And then just in case, and I know people are going to think I'm crazy. They probably already do. You read this. First of all, we can all read this. Proposing 22% tax hike. You might think to yourself, well, how much are they spending already? Gee, I wonder how much they're spending already. Do you have that link that starts with nj.gov? Corey, do you have that one up?
Yeah, let me pull
how much Asbury Park is spending?
Oh, yeah, I see it. I'm pulling it up.
Oh, okay. Let's see how much. Okay, their approach is raising taxes. Let's see what they're spending already, straight from the state education website. Look at the bottom line on that first box.
Crap. Oh,
that's the 27. $42,000 per student is what they're already spending. People are going to think I'm crazy. This is the State Department of Education website.
That's
and how the average. You're spending $42,000. You have less revenue coming in. What do you do? Corey? You say, I know. Let's raise taxes, because it's not a spending problem, right? It's a revenue problem.
Dude, that's like triple the national average of 15,000 per pupil. That's 42,000 and some change per pupil for a K through 12 education. That is over $500,000, Bob. That's $546 million for a K through 12 education. Let me buy a house instead.
This is the example.
Let everyone.
This is the example Chris Christie always gave when he would go around the state and talk about. It's one of the biggest spending government schools in districts in the world. I mean, United States is on top of the world, and Asbury Park is pretty much on top of the United States. It is basically at the highest levels of being spent almost on earth. Maybe there's little tiny places somewhere, with like 10 kids in a one-room schoolhouse or something. I don't know, but probably not even. But anyway, it's approaching the highest spending on earth. And what they say, at the moment the tax revenues are down because of coronavirus, and also state funding was cut too. State funding was cut to this district. Hey, but what do they say? Time to raise taxes.
Hey, okay, so how much did they spend? 42,000 and some change. I didn't know that New Jersey was this high, but look at the how much the private school tuition is in New Jersey, and this is in 2020. So you would expect the numbers to be a little higher because of inflation and stuff. But it looks like private school tuition in New Jersey is only about $13,600 per year. So
Right.
13.6.
And that's largely Catholic and Jewish schools. And yes, it's so some people think of private schools as like elite academies, like in some big cities where or places that where they play polo and stuff, where billionaires send their children to these elite private schools. No, most of them are Catholic schools actually in New Jersey, and they're usually according to by some state standards, actually 13,600 would be higher than
higher. Yeah, I mean the
normal.
national average is 11,000 for private school tuition.
Exactly, right. But nevertheless,
like a K-12 education for private school is about 370,000 in New Jersey, or no, 176,000. Sorry. But why not give people that $40,000 per pupil, save the taxpayers a couple thousand? They can.
Well, understand that is an anomaly in the state. In most of New Jersey, it's I think the average is between 19 and 20,000 a student. So that is, even though that's very high by U.S. standards, it's nowhere near as high as that Asbury number. But anyway, it just shows you that's the same district.
Let me buy a Ferrari and then also go to a better private school, and then I'll be better off, right? And I'll save the taxpayers some money based on those numbers. But yeah, I mean, your point is, your main point was, look, I mean, one of the ways that has been proposed is to increase the numbers even higher by 22%. And do you think that would increase the per pupil spending numbers by that much?
No. I think the goal is to replace what's being lost in the state aid, and they're going to,
they want to keep it the
upward.
Same.
The local property taxes, because we've got to keep this spending about, right? We can't spend less. We can't talk about that. So yes, to replace the state aid, we have to.
So I mean, you talked a little bit about, places are reporting that, they might lose 10 to 20% of funding or something as a result of this. That just reminds me of a little survey that I just did that I need to share. And just let everybody know, this is not, nationally representative or anything, but this is the only, quantitative data we have on this so far. I blasted this out to my followers on social media and put it at the Reason Foundation website. But I just wanted to, ask people, like, where did you send your kids right before the lockdown? Was it a traditional public school, a charter school, a private school, a virtual school? Did you homeschool? And then I asked them, after coronavirus lockdown and the schools reopened, where do you plan to send that same child, your youngest child, after the lockdown? And so I just asked again, this is just a convenience sample. It's a very highly libertarian group probably that are most likely to switch anyway. But this gives us like a little upper bound information on what we could expect. And, about 15% of the people who were in traditional public schools before reported that they would transition to homeschooling next year. And just to look at the losses for traditional public school, about 23% said that they were going to do something else, whether that's a homeschool, virtual, private, or charter school. So it's kind of similar. I mean, even though this is a selective sample and it's a biased sample, obviously not representative of the United States, it's pretty interesting that you said, maybe 10 to 20% will be lost. And then we're seeing about a 20% loss in my data as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that was the Colorado estimate that the one school finance person gave. But in a way, yes, it's not your data set, your population is not a representative of the United States. On the other hand, in one way, it does kind of control for it, because you're saying the people who at least had bought into the government schools before.
Yeah,
it's those people moving. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the only way it's biased is, the fact that, they'd be the most likely to switch no matter what, because they're libertarian. Maybe they're least satisfied with the government school system. But you're right that we kind of control for some of that, because we control for the selection into the school right before coronavirus. And, these are supposed to be actual intentions about where you're switching. So we'll see what actually happens. But I know some big think tanks are doing actual nationally representative samples right now as we speak, and I'm looking forward to seeing those results and see if they match up with mine at all. But until then, my data are the only data that we have on that question. But
well, one thing I'm working on is your camera shot is like full. I've got these black bars here. Look, I got a black bar right there. I got one. I'm trying to work on getting my black bars off of this thing, like your shot, Corey.
I don't
So
even
that's
I
one
don't
thing.
even know if you can really. Hey,
Oh, yeah, whatever.
yeah,
Thank
that
you,
does
Chris.
it,
Thank
but
you.
yeah, it blows us up a
That's
little
good.
bit.
And then also too, I do have a new camera. Well, I guess the new camera's not doing so well, but just so the viewers can see, I do have a shot of New York City. Look at that. Oh, if you can see you can see above the post office, there's New York City way back there. That's where people are not walking around right now. So I wanted to offer that beautiful panoramic shot of this city. But
Well, and if nobody realized,
around.
I have a white background this time, and before it used to be a bunch of books and stuff, but there was too much action going on behind me, so I tried to change it up a little bit. But it looks like we're over an hour, obviously, because we
Yeah, I know.
talked too much.
But
we
before
have
we
one
go,
more,
what are
we
those?
have one more thing. We have one more
Okay,
story
okay,
to cover,
okay.
which I thought was super interesting, and I think we should talk about it for a second. But there's been a lot of CDC guidance and a lot of people talking about what school is going to look like after coronavirus, even if the schools do open up. And there's a lot of talk of children being at least 6 feet apart or even 2 meters apart. Just think about the implications of that, right?
Well, no, this is from the BBC, and it is interesting. The two things caught my eye about it. One is just thinking about little kids and be like, wait a minute, you have to say, they run all around and play, and it's like, can you always control? Will they have recess? I don't know. What do you? I don't know. I would think there could be a bit of a management problem in making sure, I don't know, 7-year-olds, really don't come near each other in the lunchroom or whatever it is. I would think, I just saw that story. But then the other thing that it pointed out is it says places like Denmark and Germany, it's already happening, meaning they're already starting to bring schools back in some other countries in the world. So we're going to be able to see, I think, what happens before a lot of American schools seem like they're likely to reopen in a traditional brick and mortar sense. And so I guess we can see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the other implication of this is a reduction in class sizes, right? I mean, if you have a certain class size space, square footage, and now you're saying that children's desks have to be spaced out, like twice as far as they were, or 3 times as far as they were before. Well, then that means you reduce class sizes by 50% or even cut it to a third of the size as before. What does that do? That calls for an increase in spending on personnel, which can increase union dues in the long run. So that could be the long play here. I don't really know. I mean, maybe they really just do want to promote social distancing going forward in the schools. But I mean, one of the benefits for the teachers unions here as a result of this could be smaller class sizes and more support staff and more teachers.
Then again, we're just talking about the financial stresses on the districts, and so if tax revenues have plummeted, and if unions now take the opportunity to say like, hey, this is great, we can triple per student spending by having so much smaller classes. I don't even know what facilities they use for that, right? Like, what are they going to build new buildings to for all these new classrooms that have so few kids in each classroom? So we'll see how that works.
Yeah, but I mean, that's all the stories we have. But yeah, it's interesting to see, and I think I'm just really excited to see what actually happens. I brought up my data that I collected from that non-scientific survey, but I want to see what's going to happen. What our school is going to look like when things open up again. Are we going to have a completely different education system? Are people just not going to return to their brick and mortar schools? Are a lot of people figuring out that maybe schooling is not the same thing as education, that the factory model of schooling is outdated and has been outdated since the start of it? Will we see a mass
distribution,
homeschooling
right?
continuing?
Don't you think? Just like
a lot of people will go back. Yeah, obviously,
yeah.
But what do those numbers actually look like, and how many people are actually going to take the jump, or at least not take the jump back? I mean, because the status quo now is essentially homeschooling, right? We usually refer to the status quo as the monopoly government school system, but right now, essentially, the status quo is homeschooling. And we'll see. I mean, how many people are going to actually jump back and send their kids back to schools where the kids maybe were feeling really bullied, maybe the kids weren't happy, maybe they weren't, maybe they were feeling depressed because of all the bullying going on at the school. Maybe they were getting into fights, exposed to violence and gang activities and drugs. Maybe families, don't want to take, maybe a lot of families don't want to take that explicit step and send their kids back to violence. Of course, not all schools are like that. There's as you said, a distribution of schools. And so some families won't have any problem sending their kids back to schools because some schools maybe are safer than others. But for other families, I think there's going to be a lot of thinking going on, and this will play out in the next couple of months. But I'm really interested to see what will happen either way.
Please like and share the Random Assignment Podcast. Share it on social media, and also your own cell phone. We'll play the audio because we're now on all the popular podcast platforms. Just look for Random Assignment. We did it, Corey.
Thanks for coming in and in the broadcast. I'll go over everybody's comments, and thank you for watching. Until next time, it's the Random Assignment Podcast. We'll see you next week.